Hello, we're back again and we're right on time, and we've got session 18 now, session 20, and shining a light on the disparities to access, the impacts of COVID-19 restrictions on learning for students with blindness and low vision in Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific. And this is a SPEVI Inc. funded project, and very happy to be able to welcome Dr. Melissa Kane, Dr. Melissa Fanshawe, and Polly Goodwin. Dr. Melissa Kane is a senior lecturer and national head of secondary teaching at the Australian Catholic University in Brisbane. And Dr. Melissa Fanshawe, we've had the pleasure of on our conference committee, is a senior lecturer in the School of Education at the University of Southern Queensland. And Polly Goodwin is a professional audio transcriber, and she's also a service designer at Vision Australia. So welcome, and we'll just leave it. I gather I'm leaving it all up to you, but we've just got to finish on time so we can zoom into room 1 for the panel discussion. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue, and good afternoon to everybody. What amazing presentations we've just had in this session. I've really, really enjoyed them. So I'm hoping we can add a little bit to what we've learnt today. Just fantastic. As you know, we're presenting this information on shining a light on disparities to access in Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific for students with blindness and no vision. And this is a SPEVI funded project. So my name is Melissa Kane. I'm at ACU in Brisbane and presenting with my amazing colleague Melissa Fanshawe, who's at USQ. And we both have sons who were blind from birth, and we've been, friends, mothers, research colleagues for a long time. The wonderful Polly Goodwin is not able to join us today. She has a prior appointment, but Polly did most of the data collection for us. So we very much value what Polly has contributed to this project. So to begin, a little context. We know that COVID-19 restrictions have had significant impacts on teaching and learning globally. And we've all been there, we've all done that, and we've all managed to come through it. We know that there is a growing body of literature that's been published on experience of students and teachers as they negotiated the school closures and the social restrictions and everything else that went with it. And it's quite an amazing body of work. And going through that and being part of another project on teaching and learning more generally, we realise that there's been much less published about the experiences of students with disability and very little published about students with blindness and low vision during COVID-19 times. And so we were very lucky to be supported by a research grant through SPEVI. And through this, we surveyed and interviewed teachers of students with blindness and low vision in Australia and also small island developing states, or SIDS, throughout the Pacific region. And as such, we were able to bring teachers' voices into the collation of strategies that inform future educational responses. So our aim here was to learn how we managed to get through COVID-19, what were the impacts, but more than that, can we design something that will assist us the next time we have a cyclone, as we know is happening at the moment, or any other reason for school closure? And we've presented this data through a series of 6 key catalysts, which we'll present now. And we've also called them drivers for change, and over 4 stages of action. So moving through those times of crises that necessitate remote teaching and learning, and other fundamental shifts in practice due to crisis-driven changes. Second slide. Yes. Okay, so a little bit more about the project before we go into the results. So our participants were specialist advisory teachers who taught students with blindness and low vision in Australia and Pacific Island developing states. And we collected the data through surveys and open-ended interviews. And there were 2 surveys. So one was for teachers in nations that had been impacted by COVID-19 restrictions, and one for participants in places that had not yet been impacted by COVID-19. So that was a really interesting addition, the second one that was prompted by the SPEVI committee. And this survey data was complemented by follow-up interviews conducted with 9 participants in Australia and the Pacific, specifically teachers working in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu and Kiribati. And in general, the data analysis revealed pretty quickly that these factors were influenced or aligned with the bioecological systems model that we've heard about earlier today, developed by Bronfenbrenner and Morris. And these sorts of wider socio-economic impacts were influencing education through COVID-19. So we know that the rhetoric of inclusive education and the fact that many nations have ratified the CRDP, that's one thing. That's a really, really good start. But how this actually translates into practice involves a wide range of factors. And these are tested through those times of crisis, such as COVID-19 times. And I guess in conclusion that if we have a little bit of time at the end, we might be able to talk about our drivers model, but it's something concrete that teachers and parents and carers can use should learning go online again. And it's over 4 stages. So the first stage is now. So now that right here and now, we know that there is a potential for closures. So what should we do? What action can we take when disruption is theoretical in nature? Readying is the next stage. So what actions can we take when the disruption is likely or imminent? So if we're getting news that we might need to close schools down again because of natural disasters or health issues. The next stage is during. So what actions do we take when this disruption is occurring? And then afterwards, how can we reflect on those actions? And this is a really critical stage of analysis and evaluation, and prompts us to think about those improvements and alterations for the next iteration. And that, of course, circles back to the first stage. And as I said, these drivers are presented in more detail through factors in this presentation that will now be presented by Melissa.
Yeah, so what we want to do is show you some of the results that we've had in our study. So if we can turn to the next page, Nick. We have 6 results that we found, or 6 ways that we grouped our results. So one was about the student context. The second one was about support from and for families and the community. The third one was support from and for specialist vision teachers. The fourth one is access to learning and provision of accessible materials. The fifth one is access to and familiarity with technology. And the sixth one is preparation for interruptions to learning. Now, Nick's going to open a poll for you, and we're actually going to be really interactive and ask you what you want to hear about. So that poll should be accessible, and if you would like to select the one that you would most like to hear about, we are going to answer you. And so if you just pick one of those polls, quickly submit it, and then we will start talking about the most popular poll, the one that you most want to hear about. And if we have time, we'll go on to a second or a third, knowing very well, Dr. Spooner, that we have to go back to the other room on time. So we promise not to be late. So if you have any things in the poll there, and then Nick might be able to share with us which one is looking the best at the moment so that we can start.
Sure. So about 2/3 of people have answered now. We'll give it a little bit longer, and then I'll publish the results.
Okay, we're publishing the results. So all of these were very interesting. So we love talking about all of them because, but they were a really good way to group the information and the results that we did have. All right, what do we think, Nick?
Okay, I'll end the poll now. And so the top, I'll just share the results. You should be able to see them.
Okay, so the top result was people would like to hear about access and learning and provision of accessible materials. All right, so we're going to start with that one. And that is number 4. Oh, that's me.
That's you.
That. All right, let's talk about this then. All right, so we do have a little light bulb on the screen in the bottom right-hand corner, and it says access to learning and provision of accessible materials, and it's illustrating shining a light on disparities to access. So the access to learning and provision of accessible materials. So this is about the processes that were, were happening during this time. So as classroom teachers scrambled, and sometimes overnight, to provide remote learning experiences for their students, a lot of times accessibility needs were not viewed as a priority. So one of the responses we had was from Queensland. They were just so overwhelmed that they weren't thinking about the diversity. So there were students who fared really well as they had what they needed and were prepared. We have another response. Access to learning for any student with a disability has been harder during studying remotely. For students with blindness and low vision who are well-resourced with their own adaptive technology and have all of the skills, they're reasonably independent and can survive. And that was from Australia with no state identified. So while learning online platforms appears to be intuitive, generally this is not the case for students with blindness and low vision who are dependent on their adaptive technology. Another quote was from New South Wales. There was a bit of a lag in access to learning materials, participating in class discussions, knowing the chat field, hands up, hands down, very visual. So some contextual factors that we were mentioned in the previous themes, such as, that we talked with New also impacted, such as socioeconomic status impacted the accessibility. So we had another response saying there were schools in low socioeconomic areas where they didn't have access to digital technologies. So they were sending out paper copies to everybody, but all of their students, but everything was the same. So students then have to go, can we have access? And then by then the lesson was already over. And so the preparation wasn't really thought about. The other thing that impacted accessibility was geographical location. So in Indigenous communities, they might be using a satellite dish, or they go to the local library that was a hotspot or something, and they didn't have good internet. And this is where our specialist teachers came to the rescue, so we were told. So firstly, they prioritised getting hardware into students' homes so they could continue to learn. So one teacher told us that they just basically said, let's get in and get these kids' devices ASAP. Now, in some Pacific SIDS, the immediacy of school closures acutely impacted accessibility. And we had a quote saying, because it all happened so quickly, there was no really coordinated response. The support teachers weren't able to liaise properly with teachers on making accessible documents. Because it shut so quickly, we were not able to have students borrow laptops with braille machines. So educators did what they could with what they had. Another quote, we had a whole series of text messages translated into, and it was the lingua franca, and circulated through the whole mobile phone network. We also developed a series of parent information sheets on how to help your child and the strategies, and that was from the Pacific SIDS. One major barrier was not having a curriculum that was designed to be accessible for every student in the first place. Another quote, I get this asked a lot in the Pacific. Can you give us a curriculum for the blind? I say. The blind can have everybody's curriculum. The curriculum is not the problem. It's the structures. That's the barrier. And that was from the Pacific SIDS. So advances in accessibility have, however, been made through inclusive resource kits. And these have a range of items in the Pacific, such as magnifying dome, tactile ruler, braille books. And one of our participants described a child who had poor vision, who had not previously been to a school, benefited greatly from this magnifying tool and began going to school after receiving it. So our final quote from the Pacific SIDS was, He's been going every day since, which is just awesome. To think a $30 magnifying dome is the difference between attendance or not. So in this one about access to learning and provision of accessible materials, you will have noted there was a huge disparity. Some students found it really great and had what they needed, and other students did not. And so that was the findings from that one. Now, Nick, if we can go back, we could actually, I think we have time for another. What was our second most popular one on our poll?
So the second most popular one was access to and familiarity with technology.
Uh-huh. Oh, that would be me again. Melissa, do you want to do that? Or?
No, it's all you. Okay. Very good.
Okay, so you'll have to listen to me again. I'm sorry. This one here was about access to and familiarity with technology. And again, this was a process. So this is about something that, you know, we have in place or we don't have in place, which is why the drivers are really important and getting things set up. So the data in here revealed that students' access to and you know, their ability to use the digital technologies significantly influenced their participation in learning. This depended greatly on whether they'd already begun using digital and assistive technologies before the school closures. So we had a quote from Queensland, Australia. We've noticed that the kids have good technology skills, have loved homeschooling because they have all the technology at their fingertips and they're not under the pressure of completing their work within a period of lesson. And that was from Victoria. And one from Queensland, students that aren't that good at technology or don't have access to technology have not gone so well. So again, that disparity. One participant described a student in year 10 who was, that's about 15 to 16 years old, who fared very well. This was due to the continuity of relationships and specialist instructions prior to the pandemic. So the teacher from New South Wales told us that I've had him since he was 3 years old. He was in a great position for lockdown because he has already been accessing everything online. And that content was created before we knew we're going into lockdown. And I guess that's a really great validity of the drivers of making sure that we have everything in place before natural disasters so that we can have things in place to be able to make sure our students are supported. Another described the proactive planning that benefited another student. He had a Polaris or a Braille keyboard at his house. He had hard copy Braille books that we'd organised, and we used the Aussie Docs program as well. We then had maths books that we'd produced well ahead of time with the idea that if we did go into lockdown, that he could just continue on, and that was in New South Wales. So some students who were used to independently accessing materials in an online format required less assistance. And it is possible that they fared better than their sighted peers with less experience in negotiating digital technologies. And that was a really interesting point because we do have a few of our students who are so good at technology because they've been using it since they were 3. So the other thing is that another quote that we had from New South Wales, Australia, is that the kids with blindness felt more confident to get on and do their work. They could adjust things for themselves and they know how to do that when it's given in a digital format. My kids with moderate vision impairment still prefer hard copy print if it's given to them. Now, in some parts of Australia, priority was given to providing students with access to technology. So New South Wales, I had schools bend over backwards to try and get devices to our kids. And from Queensland, the funding requirements for assistive technology were met because suddenly something that may have not have been necessary used in the face-to-face environment became critical in the digital environment. And I had schools bend over backwards to try and get devices to our kids. In the Pacific SID surveyed, however, reliance on digital technologies to support remote learning was not an option or had many limitations, such as this quote. The majority of schools don't have the capacity and the technology because they need quick connectivity to be able to produce anything online. Or this one, a creative alternative for reaching families was the development of scripted radio segments in a variety of languages. Our program brought 2 radio segments a week. The aim was promoting disability inclusion. So that was about access to and familiarity with technology. And they, again, showed such disparity. I do think we have time for one more, Sue. Let's hope, fingers crossed. What do you think, Nick?
So the next one's student context.
Okay, student context, Melissa. Have we got Melissa? Are you good to do that one?
Sorry, I'm on mute.
Oh, no.
Okay, so looking at from breath work, can you hear me? Can you not hear me?
I just
You've
turned
got
your
a bit
video off, Melissa, because it might just make the connection a bit better.
Yeah. All right, I might take over.
Okay.
I might take over, Melissa.
Good to go.
I might take over, Melissa, because we can't hear you. So just so that we can get a couple of bits of this in. This was how we could get an individual's macro system. So this was their cultural norms and values and societal status, and their exosystems, or factors that do not impact students directly but have consequences for the students' development and learning, such as national policies and economies. So they actually influenced the education and became more apparent during restrictions. And that's really interesting, because in our earlier sessions in this one, that's what we heard about from Angie. So in the countries surveyed, students with disabilities, students from lower income families, and students from whom the national language was not their primary language were disproportionately impacted. And two examples influenced this that we heard. So we heard from New South Wales. One student with complete blindness was in year 4 when we first went into lockdown. He'd only just arrived in Australia. He is a refugee from Iraq, so he didn't speak English and he didn't yet know what Braille was. And another from Victoria. The student is not well off at home. He doesn't have his own online setup and his parents are unsupportive, so he's not doing so well. Some parents and community members were able to assist, but some were not. And a quote from Australia, the equity gap became more obvious. You could have similar children, similar skill sets, same disability, yet two very different home environments, impacting whether or not they were learning. So while a lack of access to digital technology and the internet were important factors in Pacific SIDS, cultural and economic circumstances also played a significant role. So participants related that in cultural terms, disability is often viewed as the result of cause and effect, and results in shame for the individual and the family. So in the Pacific SIDS, there is a diminished belief in the capacity of children with a disability and limited access to rights and education. So we know there are a lot of children who are vision impaired but don't have a chance to go to school. As such, working with cultural attitudes to disability can be challenging. And we've taken a slowly, gently approach to working on attitudinal change from the Pacific SIDS. Pacific SIDS closed their borders early and kept COVID at bay. Therefore, for students who normally attend school, the absence from the classroom was not prolonged, but instruction ceased the minute schools closed. There's no teacher support, there's no learning, they basically went home, we heard from one educator in the Pacific SIDS. From then, family members became the default educators. So we heard all students really got affected because most of our parents are illiterate. Also, the parents are busy working, so the students got to stay home, but they had to do the work themselves. When schools resumed, however, not all students were permitted to return. We heard the sighted kids returned, but any child with a disability was not allowed to return because the government said they were more vulnerable to COVID. The Pacific SIDS have students spread out over a large geographical area. Reaching all students is difficult even without the impact of COVID-19 restrictions. So we heard from the Pacific SIDS that in the capital city, most of the students are now receiving assistance, but not on the islands. We're trying our best for our students with vision impairment. Some islands don't have any airplanes, they don't have any telephones, they don't have any internet. So the SIDS also share fragile ecosystems and more likely to have natural disasters, such as unfortunately experiencing today. In April 2020, Cyclone Harold became significant damage in several Pacific Island nations at the same time as the first effects of COVID-19 were felt, compounding access. And we heard from them, Cyclone Harold meant students and schools were locked down for much longer. We actually called it COVID/TC Harold response. We managed that response to this natural disaster plus the pandemic. One participant detailed how they visited a school where a student with blindness and low vision had been asked to leave the school as they didn't know how to assist him. They told us, the principal said, we're not trying to move him out. It's just that we don't know how to deal with him. I said, I'm willing to come and run some training in your school. And the principal said to me, if I go there once a month, that'd be great. In addition, gender plays a role in ways that was not evident in more developed nations like Australia. So the quote was, girls in developing countries with a disability miss out on education. So they're twice as disadvantaged. Parents are far less to invest in school for their daughters when they have to pay school fees, bus fare, and uniform costs. So that was the student context. And again, just such disparities, and the actual context of the student really did impact what our teachers were telling us. Nick, if we can see if we can go back to the results, and Melissa will see if she can share with us those drivers. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to, if we could have 1 minute to sum up,
Do
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay. Yes, so we've often heard that COVID-19 has been referred to a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that's brought around the unique teaching and learning landscape. But the reality is that we will face ongoing disruptions to learning from a whole range of sources. And so with the possibility of further lockdowns and effects from natural disasters, educators are again preparing for remote learning should the need arise. And so our aim for this research was not only to learn about the experiences of students and teachers, but as I said, to create something practical to support those involved in the education of students who have blindness or low vision through periods of disruption. Now, we don't have time to present the whole model. However, we do have this in a paper that's under review, so very happy to share it when and if that gets published, and very happy for you to email us if you'd like to know more.
And we also do have a paper in the SPEVI that you can go on to the SPEVI Australia and access that free of charge.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you to the two Melissas. That was a very, very comprehensive presentation. And I just actually wrote down, I hope there's a paper coming for this, because I really want to read more about it. Thank you both so much. We won't have time for questions, but thank you for the heads up about being able to email you, which we will do, I'm sure. And so this is the end of this session. And we're all going to have to rush back to room 1 now for the panel discussion. So we'll see you there, and I'll get Nick to close the room. Okay, thank you, bye.